All right, welcome back to the SSL Family Dad channel. Today we're going to be talking all about eating organically and naturally, and is truly organic really possible? So we're going to talk about a few of those things. One of the things that we moved out here to do was to eat healthy. It started this whole trend that left us here at this farm, or led us to this farm. We started realizing, watching some documentaries and reading some books and just having friends with some medical issues and family members and talking with doctors and other things, and we started realizing how truly horrible our food system is. The food system in this country and around the world, to be honest with you, is so based on these commodity crops, these wheat and soy and corn, and these crops are just absolutely riddled with pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and all these different things. So when we moved out to this farm, we wanted things to be natural and organic, and we wanted our food to be grown without chemicals and without pesticides and without fertilizers and without all this other junk. We wanted to use natural and organic and sustainable methods to produce food for ourselves from the land that we have here. Those same principles follow through to our goat herd, our pigs, even the horses, the chickens, all that stuff. We want them to be naturally raised as possible, and so we try to do that. But is it really possible? Is it possible to be 100% organic? Can we truly rid ourselves from this system that has been created that is completely littered with chemicals? I was watching a documentary a few years ago about receipt paper. And they did this experiment where they had some receipt paper, and they had somebody touch it and just kind of maybe rub their fingers on it a little bit and then put it away. And a few minutes later, they tested their blood for the chemicals that are found in that receipt paper, and it was there. They could detect it. And you just think about that. Our bodies can fight off a lot of things. We can fight off diseases and sicknesses, and our bodies can also process through and get rid of all kinds of harmful things, chemicals and other things. But if you constantly bombard your body with too many of those chemicals, you overwhelm your body's ability to get rid of them. And that's why, in my opinion, I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but in my opinion, we have such high rates of cancers and other things. We live in this world just littered with chemicals and things like that. So, but is truly organic, is really ridding our food system of these chemicals truly possible? So with that being said, I want to talk specifically about compost today. This is something that we really rely on. It's something that really runs this farm. Compost is what everything starts with here. We can say that it starts with our hay fields, and it does, but it really starts with the compost when it comes to growing our vegetables. So I'm going to show you what our finished compost looks like here. We're going to talk a little bit about that compost and how it got here. And then I'm going to take you back to our compost pile. We'll talk about that and talk about, are we truly 100% organic here with the things that we're growing? Are we truly chemical free here on this farm? So this is almost pure compost that was put in here just a few months ago. There is a little bit of peat moss mixed in here just to kind of keep it loose from clumping together. And you can see we've already got quite a few worms in here, which is good. And this is finished compost from a year ago. So all of this was animal bedding, food scraps, kitchen scraps, leftover hay, straw, anything that was natural that could be thrown in there that would break down. There's leaves, there's some wood chips, and this is what we do. This is the compost that provides all of the nutrients for everything that we grow here. This is not even 100% broken down yet. This will take a few more years to truly 100% break down, because there's some larger pieces of wood in here. There's all kinds of things in here, and before this is, this will be releasing fresh nutrients for the plants for years before it needs to be even refreshed. So we'll grow several seasons of crops in this raised bed with the nutrients that is in this compost. Sometimes we have a raised bed mix that we add sand to. We add a little bit of sand, we add peat moss, and then we add this compost, broken down things. Man, things just grow extremely well with this mix. But let me go take you back to the source of this and talk a little bit about where it all comes from. What is in here What is truly in this soil medium that our plants are feeding off of? Is it chemical free? So we're back behind the barn here because this is where we try to hide all the messes. And this is our compost pile. We don't do anything fancy. I'm going to actually do a video very soon on Gardening 101 series video that will talk all about compost and how to compost, no matter if you're in the city or the country or whatever, how to start a compost pile and how to manage it. But this is what basically we're doing here. Everything that can be broken down and can go in here gets piled back here. We don't rotate it, we don't move it around, we don't do anything. It's a 1-year compost process. It is very, very nitrogen rich. It consists of a lot of manures and urine and things from our animals that's soaked into the bedding and things like that. And then of course our kitchen scraps and other things that go in here, or our kitchen scraps that are fed to the animals, which then in turn turns into manure, which then in turn ends up in here. This is the final result of all of the eating that goes on between the humans and the animals here on the farm. But what is truly in here, and is this truly organic? And I think the answer to that is kind of complicated, but also fairly simple. This isn't truly organic. We don't use 100% organic feed with all of our animals. So that grain that goes into that feed that we use, for instance, our chickens, are not on 100% organic feed. Those are probably GMO and heavily fertilized and chemically raised grains and other things, vegetables or whatever that goes into that feed, that in turn the chickens eat, that in turn ends up to be manures, that in turn ends up in here. Same with our goats, and the same thing goes for our family. We do buy a lot of organic food, but we don't always buy organic food, and so banana peels and apples, cores, and all those other things that end up in here, they're not always 100% organic, and so there's traces of chemicals and other things on those fruits and vegetables and leftovers that we're throwing out and other things. We don't always get organic, for instance, like spaghetti noodles or something like that, leftovers get fed to the chickens and all that stuff ends up in here. So we don't have a 100% organic system here. But I think the one thing that we have to remember is that everything that is in this system, this food system that we create, including the very, very beginning of it, the things that go into what goes into the compost, all those things are still in this system. And so we have to remember, we got to be careful about how much and what we use for this compost. We potentially or essentially are eating this. The nutrients that are in here grow things that our animals eat and that we eat. And eventually we eat the animals, or we eat the eggs from the animals, or other things. And so we are eating this compost in a way. And so we want to be careful of what we use for a compost pile. This is something that I've struggled with here to create a 100% sustainable operation that does not involve any chemicals. I've tried very hard to do that, and I would say we're pretty close. But the expense of organic grains for a large flock of animals or herd of animals is enormous. And unfortunately, we would not be able to recoup those costs on some of our animals, like goats. If we fed our goats all organic feed, we would never break even selling the goat babies for pets and things like that. And so, although we don't eat the goat meat, their manures end up in the compost pile, which grows our vegetables, which we end up eating. And so what is the solution to this problem? How do we be 100% chemical free? Well, I guess there's two ways to look at this. Number one, I don't think that we have to be 100% chemical free. I think that the traces that end up through this system by the time it ends up back to us are pretty small. And I use the example of, let's say we buy a tomato, non-organic tomato that's been sprayed all its life with all kinds of things, and we bring it home and we eat it, or we feed that to our animals and they eat it, and the manures end up out here, or we a tomato goes bad and we throw it right in the compost pile, and then we take our compost and we grow a new tomato plant naturally or organically with just our compost. We grow that tomato. How much of of any of those chemicals are still left in that end product? That's a good question. I'd love to be able to figure that out and see if there's been any tests done on that. I don't think there has been. But the end result is, having been through several systems, is that we hope that most of those trace chemicals are gone. Exceptions are maybe if we were to give our animals a bunch of antibiotics and medicines and other things, even our horses, the medicines, the worming medicines, all those things. We got to think about all that stuff. All those medicines and chemicals that we give our animals, or eventually those things end up in the system, in our food system, and we're creating our own little mini bad, food system here if we don't pay attention to that stuff. So we're very careful as to what we feed our animals every little bit. Any medicine that we have to give them, is there natural or organic options that we can use for the animal's diet to make this earth and essential oils and whatever else we can use that's natural before we give them an antibiotic or some kind of other medicine that's going to end up out here in the compost pile, that's going to then end up growing into the food that we eat. So on one hand, those things may not affect us too much by the end result once they've gone through a few different systems here. But how can we make sure? How can we be 100% organic and chemical free? The only way to truly do that is to isolate yourself from the outside and truly not allow a single pesticide or chemical to come in here, or anything that has been sprayed with or doused with a chemical or anything like that come in here. Isolate your farm. Which is really, really difficult to do, but it's something that I would like to work more towards. I'd like to grow almost all of our own foods for our animals. Generally, they eat our hay for the majority of their feed, which is 100% organic and natural. It grows out here, and we don't put anything on it. We never spray it, we never fertilize it, we never do anything. Eventually, we'll throw some manure out there and other things, but the mix of hay we have is a kind of a self-sustaining nutrient neutral, I guess you could say, mix, and so it does pretty well without too much input. I'd like to be able to grow more of our own food, for ourselves and for our animals, so that we're not buying any produce from the store, and we're not buying any grains or animal feeds from the store. That really is the goal, but you'd be surprised at how much land you have to support just a couple horses, and yourself. And goats and pigs and all that kind of stuff. Or if you get into beef cattle, you think about how much property. It takes a lot of property. They eat a lot of food. So definitely possible, but definitely something that we have not achieved yet. So don't forget, you eat this stuff. This compost is something that it ends up in our bodies in one way or another, mostly through the vegetables that we grow. Hopefully not directly. I don't think it would taste very good, but we have to be careful. We need to be aware of that. And so when you're doing your compost piles this year, stay tuned for the video on how to do that if you're interested and haven't done one before. Composting is absolutely a necessity if you're going to grow your own food, and it just it's the only way to feed your plants. I just don't believe in any chemical additions to growing food. It's just not necessary. So, but as you're planning out your compost piles or adding that, pay attention. What are you buying at the store? What kind of inputs do you have to that compost pile? Are you doing grass clippings? Great. Are you spraying your yard with mosquito control? Are you spraying your yard with fertilizer? So you haven't, doing all that kind of stuff. You have weed killers that you put out there and other things. Are you getting your grass clippings or your compost from the municipality, the city? What are they're scraping up everybody's grass clippings from all over town. What did those people put on their yards? Leaves. Are your leaves raked up off of other people's yards or your yard that's been controlled with mosquitoes and other things? Like, we have to think about all these things. What goes in to this? Compost is great, but it's not 100% organic or pure unless we pay attention to what goes into it. So don't forget to hit thumbs up on the video, guys, and hopefully that made you think. And I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think about organic and natural and farm fresh and all these words that we use? Are they really what they say they are? I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. So. But if this is your first time to the SSL Family Dad channel, love to have you subscribe, follow along. We do lots of this kind of stuff, gardening and natural growing and sustainable food operations here with livestock and growing vegetables and other things. So love to have you tag along. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Have a good one.